Hello and welcome to On Landscape. I'm here on a dreich Scottish winter day. Not looking very wintry outside, is it? And I'm with Joe Cornish, who's up here doing a winter workshop.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, morning, Tim.
And we instead of being out taking some photographs, which we would be competing with a 60-mile-an-hour wind and torrential rain and no snow, we're sitting in front of a log fire and we're going to show you some pictures of Scotland on a slightly less dreich day. Is that right?
Well, there's a few different days.
Yes.
Because it's a very indulgent for me. A lovely chance to look back on some pictures I made in autumn last year.
So can you give us an idea of where you were in autumn? Because I believe this is a sort of compilation of a few different moments.
It is, yes. So I think that there's Skye, there's Torridon, and there's Assynt. In fact, most of I spent more time probably in Assynt than anywhere else. But I think when we look through, we'll also see some from the Cairngorms and the southern Cairngorms and the sort of Central Highlands region around Pitlochry.
Excellent. Well. And our sort of goal for today is to just look at some of the background on the images, some of the ideas about construction of them, maybe a little bit about how you process them, the intricacies of dealing with the conditions. And we have about 16 images to go through. Some we'll spend a little bit more time on. Some we'll just show you as a reference in passing. If you can tell us where we're starting.
Absolutely. Well, let's sort of begin at the beginning, although it is worth saying, perhaps right from the outset, we're going to look at these in Capture One. And so the way that Capture One lays out the pictures in the left-hand column in the browser is it sort of separates them into camera types, or the dot suffix of the raw file. So we've chosen three of mine which are made with the Sony A7R2, and the rest are from the Phase 1, the IQ 100, IQ3 100. And so we'll see the Sonys first, so they're slightly out of order. So you can say the first one here is Torridon, and then there's Skye, and then there's one from Assynt, and then we'll kind of review again as we go into...
As a brief aside on that, how do you take both cameras out? I believe you do, quite often.
Yes.
And how does the differentiation between the two systems work for you?
That's a good question. I sometimes think, why do I have to keep reinventing the wheel in terms of technique? Because, looking back 10 years ago when I was, well, now a bit more than that, 12 years ago when I was shooting film all the time, life was simpler, no doubt about that. As I sort of changed to shooting more digital and entirely digital now, then you would have thought that after so long I would have settled down on a particular workflow. But actually, I find that the transition between, say, 35mm full frame and medium format full frame, it is not that difficult.
Yeah.
And the small camera offers tremendous feeling of freedom, flexibility, and it's very quick and so on. Whereas whichever camera I use, medium format, it's more considered, takes longer to set up, and for me, it's a different kind of process. So I'm trying to, as it were, speak with two languages.
Yeah.
And by working with the two systems, and while I wouldn't confidently assert that it's working for me perfectly, I'm still enjoying the learning process.
So you could almost say that the Sony ones are more dynamically approached.
To some extent, although, you know what? I mean, let's say that shot with the Sony,
yeah.
This is shot with the phase. You know what? I mean, apart from the aspect ratio, stylistically, I don't immediately see a difference. I think it's more to do with the circumstances. Sometimes it's, if I'm looking after a group particularly, and I'm having to do things quite quickly, then I'm more likely to use a Sony.
Yes. Yeah.
But saying that, I even have a transitional option with the phase, which is that I'm lucky enough to have a Phase 1A camera, so that's essentially an Alpa with a fixed prime lens, 35mm with no movements, just literally the focusing, and that's almost as quick to use really as the Sony in some ways, apart from the fact you have to focus it manually come what may. but overall, it's a very easy camera to use, and some of my favourite pictures have been made with it.
Excellent. Well, we'll start on the three semis anyway. If you tell us a little bit about this little woodland river scene.
Very simple picture, really, on the face of it, and it's in Glen Torridon, and it's just one of those brief moments of light. And I think,
can we look at this full screen?
Sure. Let's see if I can make this work. I often think that part of the British experience of landscape, and especially in Scotland, is the sort of fleeting moments of light. And in fact, this composition was seen in very soft, overcast light, and is simply while waiting that had a couple of bursts of sunlight came through, and this is literally right in the middle of the composition where the shaft of sunlight is falling. So, in some ways, it's just it's a cameo moment, a vignette.
A beautiful theatrical spotlight.
It is, and I'm happy with it. But I wouldn't say that it's a particularly ambitious image in lots of ways. So, if we go back to here, we can see it shot with 160. So that's a 70. I beg your pardon, 100 to 400 millimeter Sony zoom lens. I seem to recall it's good and crisp and everything, but this is very much it's about the light, perhaps kind of image, and the colours are rather nicely complementary and so on. But it's probably for me not an image that would stand the test of the utmost scrutiny. So moving on, here we have a picture that is made on Sky, and so this was in November when Daniel Bergman and I were leading the workshop after the conference.
Yes,
and Elgol is an interesting location.
Yeah, a reasonably well known
location. Has a lot of personal resonance, and I've been many times. I was very nervous about going back to Skye, actually, because I was fairly confident that by middle of November it would have got quieter. But I've heard almost, dare I say it, horror stories about the density of tourism that's been happening there.
The increase in tourism is dramatic over the last 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, exactly. And I didn't particularly want for Daniel, who's a good friend, and I didn't want him to be disappointed. And with a place that I've loved going to as a photographer. But he enjoyed it, fortunately, and although there were certainly plenty of other visitors, it wasn't horrendous or difficult. There wasn't traffic jams or anything like that.
Yeah.
Elgol, being the place that it is, you know it, don't you?
Yes. It's not on the way to anywhere, let's say.
It isn't. It's definitely a destination, so you have to go there with something to do in mind, and it's a photographer's dream. The Coolin Hills in the background, some of the most visually fascinating geology you could hope for on the coast, on the shore, and actually the reason I've chosen this image is because it somewhat confronts many of my normal ideas about composition, which are not to put barriers in the way of the image, but to have flow and space and so on. And this clearly does have a great big barrier running right through the middle of dark band. Yes. And then beyond that is this very brightly lit mountain, Scuranastri, between the red and the black Coolin. For me, a very iconic hill, very simple pyramidal shape, and which I've tried to reflect a little bit in the foreground. And with the light, you can see the light. There's a light beam coming in on the left, and it's almost echoed, not quite on the right, but it
does look like there's a cone of light, isn't it?
There is. It's the sun is literally right behind me, which is a complete rule breaker as far as I'm concerned. I never do it.
Yeah.
So I've done it here. So that's kind of quite pleasing in a way.
And these sort of black textured lichen, I'm not sure it's lichen or covered rocks, can be very difficult to work with.
Well, yes. I mean, astonishing reflections, reflecting the sky, of course. This is the reason it's so wet. It's not because the tide has gone out, but because because it's just rained and it was constantly showery all day. I love the sort of combination of smooth textures and glistening silvery light. And that's what drew me to make the image and to try to construct the sort of relationships that you see here. I mean, the rock wall is here, so clearly that's unavoidable. And as I say, forms a barrier between these two zones, the distance and the foreground.
Yeah.
And I find it kind of intriguing for that reason. But
I think it helps that this almost conical light beam in the mountain in the background almost connects with the head of the it's like an hourglass shape almost, with a crux point in the middle. So it forms a connection of some sort. I
think so, and I read that there were lots of approximate forms which help to sort of, there's this approximated diamond shape in the foreground, and you get these little details like this, which is slightly cropped by the way from below, and this, which, you know, an imperfect, not a perfect pyramid or anything, but echoing the shape of the mountain. That's the sort of compositional framework for it, and this big harsh division then becomes quite an interesting kind of symbol, if you will. But as you say, the light does help to connect, and it's very monochromatic. And curiously, I often find seaweed a problem. Strange colours, but here the relationship between the fragments of seaweed that you see throughout the image and the mountain actually help a little bit. By the way, for those interested in these details, this is shot with a simple zoom lens on the Sony 24-70 2.8, and so depth of field is what it is with whatever aperture I used, which is f13. Looks sharp enough.
It does look sharp enough indeed, yeah.
So, you know, we've often discussed that the effect or otherwise of diffraction in the field,
yes,
which is more important, depth of field or fine detail. Clearly, the compromise that we're mostly looking for is where there's enough fine detail to sort of satisfy the eye, but where there's also enough depth of field to give a convincing rendering of the physical space.
Yeah.
And that's something that, in field terms, I believe you can often take a lens down to say 16 and still have it be very convincing. Whereas if you were to go purely on what one might read in lens testing, you'd give up after f8. Not necessarily the right thing to do.
Well, the depth of field, if it's needed, it's needed, isn't it?
I'd say so.
Yeah.
So this is Assynt. And just to be clear, if anybody's not familiar with that area, that's to the northwest of Ullapool in northwest Scotland.
That's a beautiful photograph.
Thank you. This was just one of those days. So changeable, so classically, wonderfully Scottish. Showers, overcast, then beams of sunlight and spectacular skies in, for me, a kind of home from home for a landscape, and I feel so at home in it, and thrilled to be there whenever I'm there. I hope this picture does reflect that. This was a new location for me and for the group that Daniel and I took there. Well, for them it was all new, but it was exciting for me to discover this new spot. There was no obvious thing to do here. Compositionally, it was actually quite tricky working out how to convey the woodland, birch woodland, relatively dwarf birch woodland in the foreground to the mountains beyond, and at the same time that seemed to be the challenge: how to make those elements work together. There is no obvious link here between the trees and the hills in the middle and the mountains in the distance. So, then it becomes a game of shape to a large extent, and to play the planes of form and colour against one another. Just to be clear, in the far distance, we're looking at Culmore, I think, in Gaelic pronunciation, which I've climbed a couple of times, in shadow with the cloud over it, and then in the middle distance, which is, for those who know, just off the wee Mad Road between the Stackpolly Road and Lochinver, There's various low hills there, and there's some bright, brilliant sunlight through here.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing there, because the instinctive thing to do, I think, when you're around mountains like that is to try and get the mountain. You want the whole mountain in view and make that the prominent feature, but quite often it's very difficult in these conditions, and I don't think it does the landscape justice to just focus on that as the main element.
It's a good point. I mean, I guess that for me, I always feel that I like to emphasize. Well, let's just go back one further step. If your own response to landscape is built on a search for beauty and an idea to convey the significance of the natural world, I would hope that's what drives me. Then the holistic view is the one that I'm generally in favour of. So, or looking for, and that means emphasising the beauty of the small things in nature, grasses, trees, bushes, shrubs, lichens, anything that's around you that connects you physically to the land. So I often, as it were, subordinate the distance somewhat by using, say, a tolerably wide-angle lens. I'm sure that's what this is shot with. And then the mountains give beauty and context for me, but they don't need to be always the subject.
Yes.
It's rather the space and the feeling of the context, for want of a better word, that and the atmosphere of the light and so on that probably drives the compositional ideas.
Yeah.
And they're often complex for that reason. You could make a picture of the sort you described from here. I would have had to walk further back up the hill, probably.
Yes.
And then you obviously use a longer lens and get in tight. You could still have made a nice composition. Not here, but you can imagine, say, that's at 100%, by the way. Shooting something that draw the eye into these, wonderful prominences on the mountain and the skyscape and so on. But then I feel it would lose intimacy.
Yeah, and the character of the land it's standing on.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I do love here the sweep between that central birch and the little lichens as it sweeps around to the left and then back to the right.
Yes.
The mountain.
Yeah, drawing around. I mean, in some ways, thanks for that. Actually, it's an interesting point, because when I shot this, it's very not intellectualized. I can tell you, it's very much made, well, this is broken. It feels like, am I making that the main subject kind of thing? Is that, it could easily be dead. I'm not sure that it is, but, and is that a symbol? Am I saying something with that? But it's the visual relationships that drive the final. It's always, for me, the priority is it working for me visually? Because I'm responding in some deep level, I think, to what I'm seeing, and I would much rather allow that to predominate in the workflow than be saying, oh well, this equals that and that equals this.
I think the majority of those sorts of calculations are done post hoc. So
post-rationalisation.
Post-rationalisation. Well, it may be going on internally, but on a subliminal level.
I think so.
And then it gets revealed later on when you wonder why.
Absolutely.
Why that attracted you, or why.
And if you look at this, how it works visually. I mean, if I just draw the cursor around from the sunlit hillside here, coming down through here, and then drawing up, as it were, through the birches on the left, which have a little bit of a pattern and shape to them, and the lichens, there is a circulation there,
yes,
which works quite nicely for me. And I don't know that that's whether any of that was sort of conscious or intellectual. I certainly used a graduated filter, by the way, just to balance the exposures, but it wasn't that strong, because you can see there is sunlight here. Now, this is not full sunlight. It might look like it is, but it's actually partial sunlight. When there were some moments with full sunlight in the foreground, and it just completely exploded all the detail out of the highlights. So I had to judge the timing.
I think we talked about this before, but that moment when the clouds just start going over the sun, or the other way around, when it just starts getting revealed,
often provides that sort of painterly feel,
directional but soft,
and then the strongest sunlight's in the distance and so on, and then you have layers of light and shade, which enhance and convey a feeling of depth and emotional depth, I think, hopefully as well. Okay, so that's the Sony's over and done with. So we've got a few phase 1 files now. So this is a big change of pace here. And you picked this out from a number of images that I've made at Killiecrankie.
Yes, and I think it was the complexity of it. There is so much going on, but there's still a rhythm that connects the different aspects, especially the small cliffside, the branches coming in from multiple directions, and this sense of flow going through. So yes. It stood out, I think. Yeah.
Well, that's obviously nice to hear, and it's kind of, it rather begs the question: how do you start with woodland scenery, which is just so ferociously complex? And I know that it does make life hard, especially if you're an inexperienced photographer. But I have to say that I still find, after years and years and years of photographing woodland, that it's a jigsaw puzzle. It's a headache in the nicest possible way, and one that I love doing, partly because it's such a problem solving exercise. It's not easy, and you can only work with what you have. I've never dreamed of trying to manipulate, as in move things. In here, what the exercise is how to photograph chaotic textures, colours, lines, shapes, and forms, and still give a sense of. And I'm not going to use the word order because I don't actually think that's what it's about, but I would say a sense of coherence and energy, which has an authentic feel and connection to the place, and therefore it makes you feel, yes, that's what it's like.
Interesting thing I think with you is the concept of the movement changing the relationship between different items in a scene is one I think people can start being familiar with, and I'm interested in what draws you initially to that moment, because obviously you've got a large area of woodland, and if you tried to solve it for every single step you took in the whole woodland, you'd be there for years and you'd never get anything done. So something must initially go, there's potential here. And what are those moments for you?
That's a very insightful question. Well, I think sometimes it could be quite based on colour, especially when it's a sort of relatively soft light overcast day as it was here, and the colours are absolutely at their height. This is I would say this is the absolute height of autumn. It's late in October, and the height, as in, is still green tones, and yet the reds and the yellows and the oranges and the purples and the browns are.
You can play with relationships rather than having just this blanket.
Yes, and to some extent, the leaves are still, most of the leaves are still on the trees, so they're slightly simplifying the linear dimensions, which become more evident as the leaves fall, and then it becomes more about linear shapes, as we may see later on. But the colour relationships are so intense and become a focus. So if you've got these very, very saturated bright yellows and oranges, then if you half close your eyes and look at this image, you can see that they are clustered towards the middle and the top. So in a very simplistic form, what I'm saying is the energy centre of the image is approximately in the kind of head wall of the composition, and everything else falls away, so that lower down the tones are darker, and of course there's the river that lies below that gives that depth, and it sort of grounds the space in a way in the composition. The central beech tree is very green, as it happens because it's covered in mosses, as a kind of a primary anchor for, again, I never know if that's a good word, but it's you could see it's the linear spatial control for the image, and then everything else is a scattering of colour, really, with the one or two branches coming in from each side. The one with the dark red leaves top left, and the branch that's lost most of its leaves on the right here. and they kind of, converse somewhat across the frame. And then there's this, the darkness of the river below. And one thing worth saying, and one of the reasons that Killiecrankie, I don't know that I really want to say this because I think it's a fantastic place to go, but I would encourage anybody who likes photographing woodland to say it's a good place to go because you can photograph trees without sky there. Anywhere that has a steeply banked hillside or gorge makes it easier in one way to photograph woodland because you don't have to battle with trapped bright highlights. And that's that helps for sure here.
And I love in this picture the sense of the monochrome nature of the tree in the middle without the leaves on it.
It's amazing, isn't it? It's really, really kind of silvery light from that overcast, and you see it against the
gorge.
Yeah, it's just astonishing. By the way, that's interesting. I've noticed that before.
A little movement in the water.
Yeah, so we'll suggest it's maybe a sort of half a second, 1 second exposure. We'll see in a minute when we go back to the metadata. That, by the way, let's go into central tree. You can see the fine detail's pretty good. I think I'll find, if I were to go back again, that was shot with the Phase 1 A series camera and a 35mm lens.
Yeah.
I haven't managed to make a note of the
so that 35mm is about a 24, is it, or a 28?
24 near enough. I think you could say that. And as I say, very, very simple camera, no movements or anything. So it's not. I don't use the Phase 1 because it's because of its technical capabilities here. It's purely because that was the camera with the focal length lens that worked best for me at the time.
And movements are fairly pointless in a situation like this, or they can be useful, but it's quite difficult to make them work.
You're absolutely right. They can be useful, but you don't need them in the same way that you would with architecture, for example, because there's no obvious kind of perspective clues that become confusing. And in fact, I've found from experience that usually working in nature, while tilt is often very useful, rise and fall more rarely so, occasionally for trees, but certainly here it's not an issue.
When you're in a situation like this as well, what sort of apertures are you looking at working with? Do you think about having some sharpness, softness relationship foreground and after, or are you trying to get everything in detail?
Yes and no. I think I am, but I'm only hesitating because I don't think it's that overwhelmingly important. For example, if we take, let's say, top left corner here.
About as far as it gets, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, these beech leaves are probably closer to the camera than the main tree in the middle.
Yeah.
And you can see they're not particularly sharp. The background is not particularly sharp.
Yeah.
But actually, at any normal viewing distance, it's fine, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. Yes.
If you go to the middle, this is probably my focus point.
Critically sharp.
That's critically sharp. And most of the leaves clustered around it is probably shot at f11. I mean, to cut to the chase, it doesn't say, but I would usually think that's a sort of not too diffraction limited aperture.
And that's sort of your f8 on a 35mm camera-ish.
In practice, on a 24mm equivalent lens, I would imagine so. Yes, yeah. And I would say definitely if I was shooting that with a 24mm lens on a 35mm f8, fine.
Do you ever open up a little bit to create some depth in these situations?
Sometimes I do, and I've had absolutely no problem with that at all. I just think that if I'd given it a great deal of thought, I'd think maybe if these leaves were soft, they might be a little bit distracting or eye-catching in the way that they're here. They still feel like they're part of the image, but there's always exceptions to prove the rule, and I definitely defend anybody's right. Yeah, whatever works, exactly. Should we go on to the next one?
Yes, we're moving on to, it looks like Loch Maree.
It is, and we can still see that is 35mm, so that's with the same camera.
Now, a few people might be familiar with this location. It's not a long walk, I think, is it?
Damn, you found me out. This is a car park. This is a lay-by photo, really.
A cracking lay-by, I have to say.
Yeah, the National Nature Reserve car park on the shores of Loch Maree. So
Bene car park.
It is, yes, and so you're looking at Slioch here, under cloud, and on this side I forget the name of this mountain.
That's a wonderful aspect of that mountain as well.
It is fantastic. Yeah, I've been lucky enough to walk up through here in the past and do the Great Wilderness Walk up to Dundonald, which is one of those that I'll definitely never forget. This oh gosh, I want to say it's a beach, but I'm not absolutely certain. But these trees, there's trees which are constantly subject to the rise and fall of the loch as it changes height.
They have that sort of banyan root effect out.
They do. I find it very, very atmospheric and slightly sinister.
Yes.
One of the things that makes it very hard to photograph here is that the loch itself has got this very light rock. It's probably quartzite pebbles, which are very, very distracting around the roots.
Very dark roots as well, aren't they?
Yeah, and so here, this is I'm in a sort of fortunate position of the water is kind of shimmering around in the long exposure, and so it's softening these quartzite pebbles and allowing the roots to be more predominant or prominent, and of course still plenty of sharp detail there, and so their form becomes more apparent. Whereas what happens when the water's further out is that the pebbles dominate too much,
really bright, yeah.
and then you can't really make a picture. I mean, it's a kind of rather might look like a haphazard composition, but I promise I did think about those.
I love that, the vortex of the two trees, vertical but curling to the right, and then the two branches off the main tree curling to the left, rotating around each other. I think it's very well constructed. Thank
you. It's a sort of energy study, really. It's sort of like a little hole through in some ways there, but also there's a kind of unbalancing asymmetry, but then it's balanced again by the way it all flows around, and then there's the shimmering movement from the long exposure and the breeze blowing through the trees.
Now I imagine for that photograph straight out of camera that the trunk would be very black against the sky. How do you deal with trying to bring out some detailing?
Well, you know what we could do, and I hesitate to do this because it sometimes can make the camera look bad, but I'm going to go to image new variant, and what I'm going to have to do now is to unhook the stars, and by going to there and to just whiz back through. Sorry about this. That was poorly done, wasn't it? Can I find it again? Here we are. And find the...
Was that a later one?
No, this is it. So I'm going to do this and give it a star. And, whoops, there. And then go back to here. And hopefully I've now got the two together. Apologies for that, everyone. And now we can go to here. And you can see exactly how it looked.
Okay, so it's got some light in the trunk there.
Yes. So actually, I haven't changed it that much. I've changed the colour balance.
Colour balance and a bit of a vignette.
You probably won't be surprised to hear I used a soft filter, soft graduated filter for the top, which just helps to hold this rather bright sky. But not so much as to completely kill off the tones in the trunk.
So perhaps this is the white rocks behind you bouncing a bit of light into the tree trunk there.
And the fact that actually it was quite a soft overcast day. And this is the one moment of sunlight I remember.
That's what confused me.
Yeah. And as you can see, I've kind of drawn it out a little bit there by increasing the contrast in that area. And you can see that the colour balance is cooler in the finished, quote unquote, finished version on the left.
Slightly cooler shadows.
Cooler shadows, and I might have darkened the sky here a little bit as well. So it's more to do with balancing. Yes. You know me, I tend to turn the image upside down, and until it just looks right. If it looks right upside down, it usually looks right the right way up. But anyway, hopefully that's an interesting exercise. So let's go back to. Should we continue?
Yes, indeed.
Okay, and this.
It's one of my favourites of the selection. I think this.
Thank you. This is in Assynt, and so for those who know Northwest Scotland, if you drive you go to Ullapool and then keep going on the on what probably everybody will know now as the North Coast 500 ring road around the edge of northern Scotland, about 12 miles north of Ullapool. There's a loch or lochen by the side of the road, which gives fabulous views over the Assynt Mountains or the Coigach Mountains. Coigach is Benmore Coigach is the most southerly of those and presents a big wall at one point, a little bit before you get to the spot that we're standing here.
That sweeping ridgeline at the top right is just so dramatic.
And that is actually, although it's a small part of the composition, it's a key part, I think, compositionally here, or at least narrative-wise.
Yes.
And you may be surprised now that, you may not, but I'm now using technical camera.
Okay.
So this is shot with the Cambo with, I'll guess, 2 degrees of tilt, front tilt, and at, let's say f11 probably. So if we zoom in here, give it a moment to refresh, you can see that fine detail is as good as you could reasonably hope for. And it still is back here. And that's the joy of using this type of camera. You don't have to focus stack to get that kind of detail. But does that matter? Well, I think, if I'm honest with you now, I'd be very happy with an image made with a prime lens and no movement. I've just, now I feel more relaxed about those things. But saying that, the reason I do it is because that's how I've always done it. And not always done it, but since I started using a technical camera back in 1998. And so why wouldn't you want to do it the best that you felt that you can? So conditions were magical. Overnight snow showers, and we didn't actually know that we were going to find it like this when we left Ullapool that morning, that we'd be able to be in the snow and photographing out towards sort of snow sprinkled dusted landscape. Very lovely combination of cool and warm tones with the late autumn colours. So very special. I enjoyed seeing these sort of areas of the landscape as well. These little intimate details where the grass is just rotting away around these tussocks here as well. So for me, it all adds up.
Are these some root systems in the background, or are they?
Yes,
old
they
roots?
are.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's juniper or even very old heather, possibly. But you're looking at it's a very wonderfully classic Scottish mix of understory. It's so rich and varied, and for me, it's inspiring because we've lost so much in the UK over centuries, especially south of the border, where agriculture predominates and it feels like the whole landscape's been subjugated very often to, the will of human population. And Scotland still has genuinely wild, almost untouched land. It's not completely untouched. It would be wrong to say that, but the point is, it's not been grazed, overgrazed, and despite the fact of the horror of the clearances in the 19th century and all of that.
It's probably good. You could say it's been not industrialised as much of English landscape.
That's true. So the sheep farming that happened then, it's never been done on the same level, and I don't know the full economic process of the 20th century, but you can see that there aren't any sheep there, and probably it's not grazed there now. If it is grazed, it will be grazed by deer, and that can be a problem in terms of.
It can indeed, as you can see on Rannoch Moor and Glen Etive, for instance. Yeah. But what the question I was going to ask you here is that sky is obviously so complementary to the composition in terms of the balance of light and dark and the sunlight. Did you react to that, or was that a question of looking for the composition and then waiting for that?
It's a good question. I could show you a sequence of exposures here, but I can just tell you that I'd composed it clearly. It's not an easy picture to to get all of the elements absolutely.
Yeah.
It took me probably 10-15 minutes to work the composition out in a way that I was happy with. And in the time that the sky had changed and moved, and this is, I think, around my third exposure in.
Yeah.
And the ones after I don't like so well, and the ones before I don't like so well. This is the one where this beautiful combination of dark and light and textured, and the relationship between the ridge and the dark sky here and so on just came together really well.
Yeah.
So that's usually how I shoot. I'm sure most people will probably have a somewhat similar process. You make a few exposures and you choose your favorite, and then you either get rid of the rest or keep one either side or something like that. Otherwise you end up with such a lot.
But essentially you've the composition came first with a potential for something interesting happening in the background.
Yeah, and that's how I mainly used to shoot with film as well. It's not that different. It's just that if you were shooting 5.4, you probably wouldn't shoot 6 or 7 exposures.
Yeah.
So
excellent.
Okay, well, it was very generous of you to choose this picture, because I think that I'm more than well aware of the kind of obvious flaw in this composition.
Yeah, I mean, it's lovely, very well constructed, and I chose it because it's an example of making the most of a very difficult weather conditions and situation, because there's hardly anything going on in the sky at all.
Absolutely.
And this can create some very, very hard transitions, but you've mitigated a lot of that quite well with a sense of shade and light on.
Thank you.
On the landscape.
It is. I'm sure again, that the majority of us in the community will be thinking, well, sky with no cloud, sky with no clouds, you're never going to make a landscape photo then. But it's kind of nice to challenge yourself as well to see, well, maybe I should try and make a picture that can still offer something. The beauty of shooting this time of year, it has to be said, especially early in the morning, is that you've got lots of shadow to play with. And especially, it was a frosty morning, the frost itself is bright, and that brightness, illuminated by a cold blue sky, can actually have quite a lot going for it. There's a lovely cleanness to the light here in the foreground, which actually I think is quite complementary ultimately to the wider landscape. I've resisted the temptation to darken the sky too much, because then excuse me, it becomes like it's inappropriate. It's not a dark sky. It's very light and bright, and it's, for me, it feels quite important to be true to the light at the time for it to have authenticity.
And I think the small amount of vignetting there is enough to hold that.
Damn, you spotted that. Yeah, it did just need something to hold the corners.
Yes.
I feel visually, otherwise it becomes kind of empty, and it sort of drains the energy away from. So yes, you're right. It has probably got a small amount of vignetting. Again, maybe the Cambo and the 50mm lens, that's equivalent to about a 32 in 35mm terms, and I've tried, I think, to get. Is it really? Yeah, I think so. Yeah. It's just taking a little time. There we are. You can see the top line of stack poly. It's pretty good.
Yeah.
Looking at that, really. Not that that's what it's about, but
I do like what you've done there with what you've seen with the shadow relationships. Those staggered shadows in the mid of the ground are fantastic, relating to the foreground right.
Thank you. It does just about work, doesn't it? So we have this sort of lump of shadow here. That's not very poetically described, but, and then that kind of corresponds to the shadow lying on the hillside. So that's kind of a bit of luck, really.
Yeah.
But it does mean that there's a kind of, it sort of goes, medium tone to light to dark to light to dark to light to dark, and so on.
Helps with that transition.
Exactly. Yes. It gives us sort of a depth of sorts, and I think we'll find that this. Can you see that?
It's below
totally
your plane of
soft.
focus.
Yeah. So that is it could be described as a classic conundrum for the technical photographer. However, I don't mind it, and of course I would say that since. But I'm really quite happy for that, for the eye not to be drawn in detailed terms to this. It's really just it contributes in terms of light and shade. But if I want there to be detail, I want it to be on.
And more important, to get the heads of the grasses in focus as well, I think.
Which they're reasonably...
They work quite nicely against that background.
Yeah, I think we can see that, can't we, here? And yeah. So it's one of the sort of... a little bit of movement there, but it's one of the sort of magical aspects of technical photography is you sometimes you can't control it. You have the plane of focus, and it is what it is, and you have to live with it. Personally, I just enjoy that limitation.
It's an extra level of control as well, isn't
it? But just to finally, perhaps on this image, return to the driving forces in the composition, which are the stack poly in the distance, which is a brilliant, beautiful early morning colour, complementary, I suppose, against the light blue sky as well. But really, the shapes of the grasses were the seductive part for me. What sort of forced me to make the photo.
These curly cues of frosted tips.
Yeah, and it's just I just get so much joy and pleasure from looking at that. I don't know why, I just do. And the fact that the camera can hold that as a memory forever, because it's a very fleeting moment in time. The frost will retreat later in the day, as the sun gets up, and then through the winter the grasses get battered. They'll never be the same again. It's something wonderfully temporary about it.
And having the little red lavender bell heather, just giving an extra splash of colour in that frosty foreground is very nice.
It's kind of fun, isn't it? There's I don't think there's really any colour manipulation in this composition at all. So I think anything that we can see, if we just revert to the working file a second, will be absolutely minimal. In fact, there's one layer, and that just darkens down the top half a little bit, probably just the highlights. But you could do without that, to be honest.
Fabulous.
And that's that. Right, moving on.
And we have a pair of images to look at here.
Absolutely. Well, should I pull them both up?
Yeah.
That'd be good. Let's see, we press this green button here. And here we are back at Killiecrankie. The image on the left was shot at the end of October, and the image on the right was shot, I think, just after the conference. So it was
1 week later, almost less than 1 week.
Yeah, 8th of November.
Yeah, that'd be right. Yeah.
So it's kind of fun. I mean, I honestly wasn't bothered about whether I had the camera in exactly the same place. That wasn't the point. As it happened, though, I found this really, really interesting for me personally. I almost reproduced it because all of the things that I'd seen in the left-hand composition in terms of line remain true for me.
Yeah.
So if you think that, let's just, Capture One allows us to do this very easily. I've just got to do that. So we can look at them individually a second. That the construction thought process in this composition is the twin beeches on the right, this fabulous curving wand of a branch here, and then if you look at this and this, they converge on the tree, so they form this kind of energy accumulation around here. So there's a series of like a chevron pattern for me in those. So once I've found those, then I'm trying to build the other elements of the composition, such as this tree here, which just falls into that space so nicely. And what's funny about it is when I returned, I'll go to this one, I found this little detail.
Oh, yeah, behind the leaves.
Which just framed. And that, I know it's probably totally irrelevant, but actually I did a little bit of tuning to the positioning in order to make sure that was just nicely so, because I really love that little detail. To me, pictures like this sort of need, if they're to be worth studying, to live with, so that you can come back to them and enjoy them over and over again. Those kind of little relationships resolved feel like part of the way that you honour the subject.
Yeah.
And so that kind of philosophically and visually, both levels, they matter. And going back to this one, you can see colours are much richer, really, I suppose, in this, but it doesn't mean that I necessarily prefer it.
I can see because the leaves are so warm. You can play with the colour balance slightly by cooling the overall picture down.
Well spotted,
to
yeah.
the warm, cold
I
separation.
kind of had to do that. As it sort of comes out of the camera, it's too warm. And the result is it just looks flat, or it feels unmoderated emotionally. And it needs the coolness in the background to bring it to life, I think. Whether I've got that balance right is debatable. I think if you transfer this file to Photoshop, it looks better.
Oh, okay.
Because to some extent, I think it's true to say that Capture One works in LA Beaker or something like it. So it's actually too rich. And when it goes into Photoshop, it gets flatter and softer. And the blues are not as zingy as they are here. So I tend to slightly anticipate that when I'm working. So I don't worry too much about highly saturated colours because I know that they're going to become less so when I print them.
That's interesting, yes.
Which might sound odd. And then I usually do a final colour tune in Photoshop. The yellows and the reds are actually quite cool here. If you go in close and take the eye away from the background, you can see they're very controlled. And in fact, if anything, they are less saturated than I recall them in real life, probably because of the way that the overall colour, white balance is shifted.
I'm right in thinking there is a slight mist or a haze from the atmospheric effect in there as well, which is softening things a little bit as well.
And that for sure helps, and especially it helps in terms of depth and conveying depth. And if we move on to this day, that had even more of that. In fact, it was slightly misty that day, whereas the previous day it was just kind of dank.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons I love this version, albeit I don't think it's as immediately attractive as the other. But I love the austerity of it with these suggestions of gold. Yeah. It's more monochromatic, and the light and the feeling is that it's almost dissolving into light in the distance is a quality that I really like.
It emphasises those pen stroke branch constructions that you have in the image, which is nice.
It does. It gives more more significance to the linear elements probably than here, which is more of a study of colour.
One of the big differences I just noticed is the difference between the highlights on the branch on the far left of the picture as well, which reflects the mist above on the right-hand picture and the cooler, it's like Dreek day on the left.
It does also reflect the fact there's less leaf canopy blocking the light overhead. Yes. I think I had this my picture in the conference exhibition, so it was quite funny after the conference going back and making this picture. So I hope that will be fun for some people to see. Shall we move on?
Yeah, and we're back to Elgol.
Back to Elgol. So that was the we're with Daniel now on that last workshop of the year for me in November, and that was it's just great. It's just great to be back there. We went twice, in fact, because everybody loved it so much.
Yeah.
And this one was made on our first visit. We went to the area north of the harbour, which is the kind of popular area. It was a beautiful afternoon, and you could say very archetypical with weather systems and fast rising tide.
Those cloud structure over the Cullen, it's very familiar.
Yeah.
It's very often you get that hanging construction.
I've effectively never been there and seen it as a ridge, and I'm quite glad. Well, not that I'm glad, I'd be always happy to go there, but it wouldn't be nearly as exciting as when it has clouds sort of ripping over the top of it like this. One thing you might be interested to know is that is shot with the Alpha camera, so it's not with a technical camera, but the fine detail is still pretty good, isn't it? Yeah. So if we look at this, the focus point would be about here, on and I probably, I don't know, maybe let me see if that is, I recorded it in the metadata, it's F14.
Yeah.
So
I love the way the very small barnacles create that texture on those rocks. It's a very...
you can touch it almost,
yes.
can't you? Yeah, it's very, very physical kind of presence. So this is slightly out of focus. I hope this process is not. I'm not trying to unpick it technically for kind of geeky reasons, but just because it's probably interesting to see how the limitations of optical physics do not mean that the photograph doesn't work or whatever. They are what they are. The barnacles are getting softer into this corner. Does it matter? I don't think it matters
as
at
it
all.
approaches the corner now.
I really don't. It's plenty of nice detail here. So it actually, what it does is it helps to converge the attention, the subliminal attention, the image, more towards the middle. But clearly the composition is designed to form a kind of frame for the rock here, and to sort of perhaps to try to emphasize the relationship between these two parallel linear elements, which also reflected in Square Street here. So there's a certain kind of playing with shape and form.
There's another. You've shown me a second example of this, which had a lot stronger light, and a lot of people may think that would be the better photograph. But I think in this case, it's another one of those cases where that soft transitional light helps open up the picture. You still get the sense of the warm sunlight, but everything else opens up as well at the same time. And it works a lot better in my eyes.
It's a matter of emphasis. I don't know if you've got time to go back to the other one.
Yeah, we can skip it if
Yeah.
you like. But it's interesting that soft light works well again. Soft
totally
in the
agree.
foreground and directional in the background.
And just enough sunlight to it's a kind of gild would be the wrong term because that makes it sound very superficial, but it just highlights literally enough detail to draw it out without over emphasizing it. And it's that balance that I think we see Square Street has just got a little bit of sunlight across its flanks here, which just enough to keep that space active and important and significant.
Presumably these are the last moments of the day, aren't they?
Relatively late in the day. Yeah, absolutely. It was compositionally, it was a real headache because this area is difficult, no doubt. It's a big sort of empty space of water, whereas this has its quite interesting rock features here. And
you're sort of constrained a little bit in the corners in the foreground as well, aren't you? And you need some sort of diagonals to fill those corners without making them too complex.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's not a search for perfection; it's a search for ultimately for connection. I think, if we think of it that way. Okay, there's another couple here, and we're still at Elgol. In fact, the rest of it's going to be in Elgol, and this is from the south part of Elgol. That's much less well known. And these two images are separated by 12 minutes, and I'd have to check, but I think the white balance is the same on both of them.
Yes, yeah.
Which is completely
it's quite
weird.
Extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, this is the reason I was interested in looking at those. One because it's away from the obvious direction to go when you get to Elgol, which I think is fabulous, and two because the way the sea has changed in colour and texture between the two is dramatic as well. It just shows how it's worth spending a little bit more time and observing carefully what's changing.
That's right, exactly. As the clouds move through the sky, so they shift the sunlight around in different ways. Clearly, there's no sunlight on a day like today, but it's still affecting. The sun's still affecting the colour of light, and the colour of light is what determines the colour of the reflected light. The light reflected in the sea, or light reflected in the rocks on the top. See, there's minimal colour change. It's actually just down here in the foreground. It's still a colour change, but it's not as obvious as it is, say, in the rocks here. Quite magenta-ish here, much more cyany here. And honestly, that's just to do with the colour in the sky. As the colours in the sky has changed, so everything else has changed. And clearly there are other differences in emphasis between the two images. Here, this has a much more kind of stormy feel. This is still very stormy, but you're starting to look through to the
the sense of the back of the
see that rain
corridor
cascading down that ridge there. It's just amazing, I think.
The back of Korusk, is it there?
Yeah, Locharushk in there, absolutely.
Yes.
And however, I mean, from a compositional point of view, the kind of funky fun bit of it for me was making sense of these weird and wacky lichens in the foreground.
Yeah, the balance between the very white lichens and the dark rock, and there's a very peculiar the yellow lichens can almost go green in places as well. They're quite strange to deal with.
They are not easy at all. I can't recall now whether I've tweaked the yellows in the color editor. I may have done, but probably not.
They look as I remember them, definitely.
Yeah, that they should. I think it's in a way with this sort of thing. I can't see much point in changing the colors because they are what they are. I love the shapes of these, but it is a challenge because the lichens themselves are a fascinating life form. I won't say they're easy to do. They're most definitely not, but they have most wonderful little abstract shapes.
Embryonic shapes. And things.
Yeah, absolutely. It recall all sorts of other life forms and life forces, and there's a big color change here as you go from the white to the yellow lichens. The textures are rendered beautifully by the lens. I mean, it's one of the things I still kind of get a childish joy out of in photography is seeing the way that that the camera can convey so much detail that you can just take it all in a way that when you're out there you probably don't have time to contemplate it.
It's this post-exploration that's quite exciting. I find that quite often. It's wandering around images. In the scanning work that I do, I scan quite high-res, large format files from lots of different clients, and it's in the process of sometimes spotting occasional problems. It's great to wander around and find little mini vignettes throughout pictures.
Absolutely,
discover. So yeah, fantastic.
I know when Jen used to do a lot of retouching when we did a lot of scanning, she said, "Oh, the nice thing about looking through your pictures is I see lots of pictures within the pictures."
Yes. Yeah.
And you can see as there are multiple abstractions within a composition, which I think is part of what makes a picture worth living with. Over time, is you can come back to it and see things you hadn't seen before, and little relationships that kind of resolve themselves in different ways that may appeal to the imagination, and just as your imagination changes over time. So that's the two of those anyway.
And then we have a last pair of pictures, which are a couple of my favourites, and the same location, but very different ideas.
There we are.
There we go. Yes.
So it's an odd one. I mean, this is a classic example of why it can be worth staying with the tide as it changes. And I think you'll probably guess that when I started trying to get this composition to work, the tide was actually quite a lot further out.
You gave yourself enough time.
It was at least half an hour before I started composing it,
yes.
and probably longer. And I knew that it was going to come in, and I wasn't sure. It was vigorous, but I felt still reasonably safe. But I knew I might have to get to the point where I had to lift the camera, the tripod suddenly, to avoid getting inundated. Where this is, do you want to know?
Yeah.
So south Algol, and looking towards Rum.
Rum, is Egg as well, or is that just Rum?
Egg's around to the left.
Yeah.
You can see Egg from there. Those of you who know Paul Wakefield's work and have his magnificent book, Landscape,
yes,
will maybe be familiar with a cover or the jacket image of that, which is actually from a rock near to here. Obviously, I wouldn't want to copy what Paul did. And in any case, Daniel had already gone up there, and he was on that spot. So it's an interesting challenge for me was to think, what can I do here to, what's getting me excited and interested and so on. And it is a nice area of rock, but without doubt, it was just little clusters of limpets
Yeah.
here that drew my eye. So ideal territory for the technical camera.
Yeah.
Because of tilt. They're all more or less in the same plane, so we can
flat
see.
plane going off towards the horizon.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's a sort of, I'm in my comfort zone, without a doubt, creatively. But there again, it's quite good to be in a comfort zone creatively when you're not really in a comfort zone with the weather and the conditions. So if you're in a way resorting to utilising skills and experience that you already have, I don't think that's a bad thing.
Well, I love in that first image, which is obviously what you saw originally, the elliptical rotational structure of the band with the first limpets on and the second row of limpets and that wonderful circle of water.
Thank you. Repetition in that one. Yeah. These moments, and you'll know this from heaps of years of shooting yourself, that when the water's flowing in and out, and you're trying to exploit movement it's a tricky one. You're thinking, how long does the exposure need to be to get the balance between simplification but retaining texture, detail and structure. And over time, it doesn't always work this way, but it's usually when the waters are retreating that the best structures appear. And
it enhances the form of the rock, doesn't it? Yeah.
Exactly, and that you get these little moments of magic. I mean, this perhaps could be better, but you can see there's this little eddy which creates this little disc here. Yeah. That lasted 3 seconds maybe. So I had to, as just drawing out. This is emptied again. These shapes, and even here, it was still emptying each time. So it wasn't as if you could study it for long. You just had to constantly observe all of the relationships to try to choose the moment that gets as close as you possibly can to a satisfactory result. And of course the clouds are constantly changing. I actually slightly prefer the sky in the left hand one, but I'm reasonably happy with both in that respect.
I love in the second one, it's difficult to choose between the two because the construction of the photograph is more dominant in the first, but the second has a sense of power and movement that is very engaging.
Oops, sorry. Yes, it does. Thank you. I shouldn't say it does, should I? I love this slightly.
Is it your preferred one?
I think for two reasons. I think one is the slightly threatening forming wave here, as it's sort of darkness underneath it. You can feel it forming and start to sort of encroach upon the space. The retreating energy of the water, but the photographer in me goes straight to these little bubbles.
Yeah.
Here as what you can almost hear it, the water retreating. That very familiar sound of the. I didn't do that sound very well, but you know what I mean. As the wave
vaguely
goes,
sucking noise.
As it goes back out, and it leaves these wonderful little details.
Beautiful colour in the rocks in the background, as well as the limpets have scraped away at the sandstone or whatever it is.
Yeah. And they do move these things.
Well, as we saw in the conference of Theo Bosboom's presentation, that was quite fantastic. If you get a chance to see, we'll put a link at the bottom of this video.
Please do, because actually, having looked at Theo's video, I then went back to a series of pictures I've made in Cornwall over the years, and where I've done a shot over a period of 10 minutes, and you can see these things, they really really do move around, even though when you try to move a limpet, you feel like you can't. They're amazing little life forms. They really really are. That's got a slightly more restrained colour palette, I think, than that one.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a reason for preference as well. I'm not sure.
There's a sense of directional light, and there's almost like on the left middle, almost a gilding on these rocks here, the golden reflected light, and then there is on the other rocks as well. You get the very edges are lit.
Difference, isn't it? Yeah, because that is absent from that one. But here, that is because there is the sun never came out, but it was just. That's just fairly thin cloud.
Yeah.
If I were to take that layer out, that corner is actually quite bright, but I darkened it down because I didn't want it to distract. There's still a bit of work to be done to get this ready for printing. But overall, I can say I'm reasonably happy with that, and I'll just do this because I prefer seeing it with a bit more light and space around it. But it is fun when you see an image like this, and it's reasonably well executed in terms of camera technique. That these extraordinary textures and colours and details, going back to the point I was making earlier, really, that when you print that, and you can, I know people always sort of laugh at photographers for sniffing prints, but I'm the guiltiest on that front, because I just love looking at the details of nature.
It's another sense of exploration, isn't it?
And the
textures of nature are part of the fascination with it.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of here what makes this working in these kind of environments fascinating is the contrast between the hard, clear detail and form, and then the elusive uncertainty and the mystery of motion, which is embodied in the water here. So, and I think that's, you see it in the landscapes clear again, and it's that contrast is one of the most powerful and alluring things about being by the sea for me, both as a person and as a photographer. It's the endlessness of it, the elusiveness of it, and that's will keep me going back to the sea to photograph, I think, for the rest of my life.
Well, thank you very much for that series of pictures, Joe. We'll get some of these and we'll put the pictures in the magazine when it comes out as a PDF, and I hope you all enjoyed it. Thank you, Joe.
Thanks, Tim.